everyone, and welcome to another middle school conference training session. Today we're going to be discussing parliamentary procedure and doing debate prep. Without any further ado, I'll turn it over to our officers for today.
Hi, I'm Ella Bullock-Papa, and I'm GA Liaison.
And I'm Jack Barexa, and I'm the Secretary General for MUN V.
And I'm Jackson Payton, and I'm another General Assembly Liaison.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about debate format. So just to start it off, the basic format for debate is there's going to be an introduction, and then there's technical questions, and we'll go back through and explain all of these in a bit more detail in a moment. But it's your introduction, and then people can ask you questions, and then there's some debate rounds, and then you give a conclusion, and then people vote on your bill. So in a bit more depth, let's talk about the introduction first. You and the other people representing your bill in your country get to deliver this. You have a 2-minute limit, and the main things that make a good introduction is to have a good hook. You want to draw people in from the very beginning, and you want to lay out your problem clearly and quickly, and you need to explain how your solution is going to work if you don't do that in your resolution. Something really important here is to try and keep your introduction brief. You don't want people nodding off before you even get to debate, and you definitely want to be able to save time for your summation so you can go back and address any arguments that you didn't get the chance to talk about during debate rounds as much as you would have liked. So the next part of the debate format is technical questions, and that's when people can ask you questions that are answered yes or no, or with a number of statistic, or sometimes a quick clarification for your bill. And these are very quick, and it's one person after another. So you need to be on your toes and know your information and your statistics to be able to answer these. If you're asking a technical question, the most important thing to remember is that it should be a really short answer, and it needs to add to debate. Don't get up and just ask, what's the population of your country, if it has no impact on the resolution at all. So the next part of debate is where we move into the pro-con rounds. So there's 3 con rounds and there's 2 pro rounds. They go con, pro, con, pro, con. So con starts off debate and it finishes. So that's another reason why you need to save time for your summation. If you're the patron of the bill, you want to be able to have the last word, so make sure you save time for it. But as far as the pro and con rounds go, the way it works is a delegate, you get to stand up and you introduce yourself. So you say your last name and your country. So I might say Bullock-Papa, Nicaragua, and then you get to choose 2 out of the following 3 things. So you can give a speech, in which case you need to say, may I address the floor? You can ask the patrons a bunch of questions, in which case you ask, do the patrons yield to a possible series of questions? Or you can yield time to a fellow delegate. So you get to pick 2 of any of those. You could give a speech and you could ask questions. You could ask questions and yield to a fellow delegate, but you only get 2, so pick wisely. It's generally good etiquette to pick only questions or speech and then offer to yield time to a fellow delegate so that everybody gets a chance to speak. That's pretty important. So as far as the actual speech goes, if you say, may I address the floor, and you get up to give a speech, the important thing is to make sure you're staying within your time limit. And it's almost always helpful to have actual facts or statistics you can reference. While rhetoric is good and it makes a good point, you want to make sure that you actually have evidence behind it. So once all of the debate rounds are done, then you get to move, if you're the patron of the bill, then you get to give your conclusion, which is your summation, which is 1 minute plus any time you might have saved over from your introduction. And you should be relatively brief. Again, there's no reason to drag this out. But the first thing you need to do is you need to address any comments or really convincing arguments people brought up against your bill, and then you need to go ahead and sum it up and tie it off with a final plea or argument for your own. You can bring up points other people brought up in favor of yours before you finish off, and then yield the remainder of the time to the chair, and you're done.
Now we're going to be talking about what makes for good debate. So one of the first things that you'll go into with debate is having a good round of technical questions. Now, in technical questions, it's important to remember what Ella said, in that you should only ask a question that can be answered with yes, no, a number or statistic, or something that's a quick clarification. For example, if someone has a resolution that's aimed towards building a well for every 10,000 people in their nation, it would be a good question to ask their nation's population, and maybe not a good question to ask about their environmental regulations. Now, all of these technical questions should be able to be answered quickly. And if you think that someone's asked you a technical question that might take you a little longer to respond, it is totally fine to answer. It's better answered in pro-con debate. This lets the person that asked the question know you have an answer to their question and you can get to them, but maybe technical questions isn't the right round for that question. Now, another important thing for pro-con debate is remembering what makes a good con round. It's important that anytime you're conning a presentation, you're conning the actual resolution and not the people who are presenting that resolution. If you don't like someone's shirt, you shouldn't bring that up in your con speech. You should instead address concerns you have with the resolution. If you think that it's not financially feasible or goes way outside of the budget that they've requested, that is a good con round. But if you think that someone's resolution is dumb or not what you would have done as that country, maybe you should keep those ideas to yourself and not bring them up in rounds of debate. And finally, when talking about when you should ask a series of questions, it's important to remember what the purpose of a series of questions is. Now, when you're asking a series of questions in either a pro or a con round, it can be used to emphasize a point that you're trying to argue or clarify an argument for yourself. If in the example of a resolution aimed at building wells for every 10,000 people, you have lots of questions addressed at what will the costs be? How many wells will be built? All of those questions are good and can be asked back to back and answered quickly. Now, the last thing about debate is the ability to address the floor. When you're addressing the floor, you as the patron have the right to talk about the resolution to everyone in the General Assembly. This is a really good time for you to share an idea or a statistic that you feel the presenters may not have brought up. And it's a great way for you to engage in helping or bringing up an argument that contradicts the presentation on the table.
Okay, so now we're just going to talk about some extra things. So one of the first things that might be a little confusing is amendments. And an amendment is basically just a change to your resolution after you've already submitted it in October. So there's two main types of amendments, and both types have to be submitted beforehand to the conference officers, meaning before you're sitting like in your chair in committee. So first is a friendly amendment, and that's usually when the patrons of the resolution would like to fix an error in their resolution or change any part of it based on new information. Because a friendly amendment was introduced by the patrons, it doesn't require a vote to pass. And then on the other hand, an unfriendly amendment is when another group introduces an amendment to a resolution that is not their own resolution. So an amendment that is unfriendly would require a motion to be recognized, which we'll talk about motions in a second. And it also, since it's unfriendly, like the group didn't since it's unfriendly, the group didn't present it, this amendment will require a vote. And then also, let's talk about some motions. So motions are another part of parliamentary procedure that can be a little confusing, but basically a motion is just a formal request to do something to the committee. So the biggest types of motions you'll need is one, a motion to recess, and that is when you would be like going to lunch or something like that, but you're not formally ending the committee. And then the second type would be a motion to adjourn. And a motion to adjourn would be happening when you're not going to be coming back to committee like after a lunch or after a break. So a motion to adjourn would happen at the end of the day. So any other types of motions that you can do will be detailed in the conference book, but you want to make sure that when you're doing a motion, it's serious. And so the way you go about doing a motion is you'll say motion, and then the chair will ask you, please rise and state your motion. And then you'll rise, you'll say your name and your country, and the chair will either choose to recognize the motion that you're requesting or not recognize it. And so when the chair recognizes the motion, you'll then perform a vote by voice acclamation. And so voice acclamation is when, instead of raising your placards to vote, the chair will say, all those in favor, and then everyone who's in favor of that motion or whatever is being voted on will say aye. And then all those opposed, or the chair will say, like, all those opposed to the motion or whatever, and all those opposed will say nay. And then based on the ears of the chair is what we say, the motion will either pass or fail. And
This is GA Resolution 12-1-14, Marine Protected Areas in the Mediterranean.
okay, so the way it would start, so I'm gonna act like the chair for the committee, and then Jackson is gonna present the resolution, and then Ella is gonna debate with herself. So the way that the committee or the resolution will start is the chair will say, next we will see the patrons of a resolution for marine protected areas in the Mediterranean. And the patrons have 2 minutes for their introduction, and they may begin when ready.
The Mediterranean Sea has an abundance of sea creatures and plants that all survive off its fragile ecosystem. Unfortunately, as global ocean temperatures rise and oceans are becoming increasingly polluted, this ecosystem is threatened, and certain plant and animal species are placed at higher risk for survival. Thus, the nation of Monaco seeks that other nations join us in our efforts to support and establish marine protected areas, known as MPAs, in the Mediterranean Sea. These MPAs are especially important in areas of known biodiversity, but are helpful wherever they can be placed in the sea. The network of managers of marine protected areas in the Mediterranean, abbreviated MEDPAN, already has 1,231 MPAs, covering a total of 7.14% of the sea. Unfortunately, only 1.6% of the Mediterranean Sea is regulated by national MPAs, which have more regulation and protection than ones unaffiliated with any government. This resolution seeks to change that issue by encouraging other Mediterranean nations to establish their own MPAs. I yield the remainder of my time to the summation and urge passage of this resolution.
Thank you, patrons. With that, the patrons have yielded 30 seconds to their summation, and we will now move into technical questions. Do we have any technical questions? Bullock Papa.
Bullock Papa, Nicaragua. How many MPAs are already in the Mediterranean?
There are 1,231 MPAs already in the Mediterranean.
Thank you.
With that, the time for technical questions has elapsed, and we will now move into our first round of con debate. Do we have a con speaker on the floor? Bullock Papa.
Bullock Papa, Nicaragua. May I address, or no, scratch that. Do the patrons yield to a possible series of questions, and may I yield the remainder of my time to a fellow delegate?
They do so yield, and that is your right.
Okay, since there are no other delegates, I won't do that, but I'll go ahead with the questions. So, aren't MPAs super expensive?
They do have a wide range of cost, but depending on area, some of them can actually be as cheap as $41 per square kilometer, which still adds up to a lot, but when you consider that's $41 for an entire square kilometer of protected ocean, that's an incredibly encouraging statistic. And the cost of repairing all of these sea environments much farther down the road, once they've been more polluted and have had more of their ecosystem destroyed, is so much higher that it's so much more financially responsible to do this now as opposed to waiting and trying to do it later.
Okay, so why should we care about saving fish or coral when we could just use it to save lives? The money.
Well, obviously, it's really hard to put a fiscal value on any type of life, whether that's human or animal. But these fish and plant life that survives in the Mediterranean Sea doesn't just exist on its own. It's incredibly important in the lives of humans and is a large industry of fisheries in this sea that supply food for people. And the plants are incredibly important in all sorts of different fields, and they can be used for different medicines and even as a food source themselves. So while this may be seeming like saving fish or plant lives, it ultimately saves human lives because of the advancements and food that can be supplied from it.
Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
So with that, the patron yielded the remainder of her, or the delegate yielded the remainder of her time to the chair. We'll now move into our first pro round. Do we have a pro speaker on the floor? Bullock Papa.
Bullock Papa, Nicaragua. Do the patrons yield to a possible series of questions, and may I address the floor?
They do so yield, and that is your right.
Are MPAs actually effective at protecting the environment?
They're very effective at protecting the environment, and they have such a wide range of applications, from the ultimate classification of no-go zone, meaning no motorboat traffic can go through those zones, to different areas where they are just simply designated as areas of booming biodiversity and aquatic life that need to be set aside and not used for any form of dredging or bottom of the sea net fishing. And finally, there are areas designated as no fishing zones, meaning no fishing vessels are allowed in there so that the animals and plant life remain undisturbed. But it does allow motor traffic above the water, so that way different vessels can still pass through them.
Thank you. Fellow delegates, it is vital that we preserve the few undisturbed wildlife areas we have left. Maintaining ocean biodiversity doesn't just protect the fish, it protects us. Having diverse ecosystems means having diverse resources that we can use for medicine, research, or even protected ecotourism. I strongly urge passage of this bill and yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
With that, the time for the first pro round has elapsed. We would usually have 2 more con rounds and 1 more pro round, but we're going to move into the summation. So we will now move into a 1 minute and 30 seconds of the patron summation.
Fellow delegates, the Mediterranean Sea has been threatened by pollution for too long, and now is the time to make a change in the right direction. These MPAs are by no means a miracle cure for the centuries of damage that has been done to this sea, but they will help to repair some of the issues that the damage has created. Eurocean reported that 60% of all plastic found on the ocean floor in Europe originates in the Mediterranean Sea, and these MPAs would help to reduce that statistic. I yield the remainder of my time to the chair and urge passage of this resolution.
With that, the patrons urge passage. We will now move into voting procedure. Okay, so all those in favor of the passage of the resolution, raise your placards. And all those opposed? And any and all abstentions? With a vote of 1 to 0 to 0, this resolution does pass.
An important thing to remember when you're at Model UN is to always refer to the pieces of work that you're debating on as resolutions. You only call them bills at Youth and Government, so make sure that you're always referring to them as resolutions.
Question: how long is the time for con-pro speeches?
Each con-pro speech or round is 1 minute long.
Thank you. Question: where can I find the rules for debate written down?
Yes, so all the rules for debate are in the Middle School Model UN manual on the Tennessee CCE website, and then also when you get your conference book, everything that you need will be in there too.
Question: do you have to say your name and country every time that you speak?
Yes, you should always say your last name and your country when you talk.
Thank you. Question: Does it matter if you get the exact phrasing right when you're asking what you want to do at the start of a con or pro speech?
You do not have to get the exact phrasing right. The suggested phrasing is in your manual, and it sounds like this. May I address the floor? May I yield the remainder of my time to a fellow delegate? Or do the patrons yield to a possible series of questions? However, it doesn't have to be this exact wording. You should just be able to convey your intent with your questions.
Thank you.